Today, we're going to be talking to an expert in human nature, an expert in thinking differently, an expert in why it is we do what we do and how that can affect us in our life positively or negatively. And that expert, his name is Mr. Terry McMullen. For those who don't know Terry has spent the last 10 years studying philosophy, cognitive psychology, and social psychology. He's a member of the American Psychological Association and the American Sociological Association, and he wants to try and figure out what really makes humans act and behave the way that we do. He spent the last year making a self-reflection video every single day on YouTube, so that is literally 365 days straight, and engaging in conversations with all types of people to get more insight and clarity. The result has been a philosophy that he calls Adrogo, which we're going to talk a lot about today. And it is based in a deep belief in mathematical logic and mental toughness to help us to guide our thinking. Terry, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here, brother.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. Couldn't be happy to be on. Really appreciate it. And I love the work you do, Brandon. It's the stuff that needs to be out there and how we can all be better. So thanks for letting me be a part of it.
I appreciate that, man. The first thing I got to ask you, dude, just going off of your bio there, is you made a video every day for a year straight. You know, we talk to people who want to be a YouTuber. We talk to people who just want to put their story and their message out there. But I know firsthand that it can be a pretty fearful experience, putting yourself out there, sharing your thoughts, even if only a few people are watching, because as you know, that few people turns into many people. And I guess my question is, what made you want to make a video every single day on YouTube for a year straight?
Yeah, so it was it kind of came on a whim a little bit. It was in the very early onset of COVID, so it was kind of that wacky time where everybody was thinking like, what's going on in the world? What do I do here? And I had been thinking for a while, like, I want something more in life. I want to be better in life. I want to be happier in general, but I just didn't have a good grasp on what that was. Right? I found myself kind of spinning, trying to figure out what I should be doing. And my brother, actually, who I talked to a lot about all this stuff, happened to send me a video from an artist, a YouTube video, where the artist said the greatest advice he ever got was when he was stuck. He couldn't think of, what to draw, what to paint. He had that kind of artist block. The advice he got was just pick one thing. Pick one thing to draw and draw it every day for a year. Don't think about anything else. Don't think about any agenda. Just do that every day. And the thought was that if you do that, eventually, without those restrictions and kind of the pressure you put on with your own mind, you'll start to realize what you really want to do. So for me, I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make a YouTube video every day for a year and just kind of go with that. And the funny thing about it is when I first started to do it, truth be told, in my mind, I was like, this is going to be great. Like, I'll probably within a few months, I'll have, thousands of viewers and I'm going to be huge and it's going to be on YouTube. And I kind of went into it with that mindset. But within a few months, I started to realize like this is great if it helps people. That's an amazing part of it. But it was so much more for me internally. And just like you said, it was self-reflection. It was a conversation I was having with myself every day for a year, understanding myself at a deeper level, and then building that discipline to say like, hey, I committed to do this every day for a year. I'm going to do it no matter what it takes. So it was a really, really cool experience.
Hell yeah, man. Let me tell you, even though like coming from a similar experience when it comes to YouTube, I started last year too, like really went in and started last year. And even now to this day, it's been a year, technically a year and a half since I started it. I'll have 20 to 30 people watch a video. Some videos will get 500, 1,000. Like my biggest video right now is like almost a couple thousand, which is cool. But the average one's like 20 or 30. And some people might look at that and be like, well, you're not really reaching that many people. But this is the thing, dude. Like one person will watch it. One person will go to my site, will invest in themselves, will invest in a goal setting course or a estate management course. And then they'll take it even further and it will really help them. So while you're not reaching a ton of people right now, you're making a giant difference in even just one person or a few people's lives.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. And you know what else was interesting about it for me is what you might imagine, right? You said it in the beginning. It's a fear-ridden process. For me, at least it was, because you're putting yourself out there and you're doing something different. And some of the typical things you would expect happen in the beginning. As I started to share it a little bit, people that I knew in my circle started to see it. And you get a few people that are like, hey, what are you doing, man? Like, this is weird. Why are you making these videos? I don't really get it. Like, what's the point? You only have like 2 views on most of them. And I got to tell you, like, it was so easy in those moments to be like, I got to wrap this up. Like, I can't do this. This is embarrassing. This is stupid. My mind wanted to go there right away because that's just where it typically goes. And forcing that, I've heard you talk about this before on the show, like building that muscle to do that stuff and show your mind like, no, I'm still going to do it. Even though it's uncomfortable, even though I feel embarrassed in this little bit, like I know why I'm doing this and I'm committed to it and I'm going to stick with it. And that was one of the most beneficial parts of it. Like overcoming those fears and facing that and sticking through with it was invaluable.
What would you say the biggest realization you took away from that experience was?
I would probably say that I just didn't have clarity on who I really was and what I valued before. And I say that because I would talk about a lot of the same things that I talk about in those videos in my own mind, right? Maybe even in conversations. But it's so easy in our own minds to kind of forget things or make these quick assumptions. And personal view, which I think science backs up pretty good, is that our minds want like a cohesive narrative. We want a story that makes sense, that makes us comfortable. That's what we're looking for. And when you're just in your own head, it's very easy for your mind to do that. There's no challenges, nothing's on record, nothing's documented. You don't have to like refer back to what did I say a week ago. So it's easy to kind of feel comfortable, even if you're not happy, even if you're not really comfortable, your mind can convince you of that. Once I started putting things down in video and then I would go back and watch it and I kind of kept the conversation going for a year, it was more accountability. There was less ability for me to just feel in my comfort zone and change the narrative as I needed to make it fit. I had already said some stuff that I had to say, well, I have to reconcile that. And like, I don't want to be hypocritical. So it forced me to kind of dig down deep and start to face what I would call like these inconvenient truths of like, well, I said that and I thought I believed that, but now I'm saying something different. Like somebody's lying here in my head. Like what's the truth of it? So I think the clarity that I gained of just understanding how my mind works and more about what I really value and what I really care about was the biggest thing.
That's huge. That's huge.
Yeah.
And let's take how your mind works, right? Because the episode today is all about how we think and how that affects us in good or even in adverse ways. What do you believe? Why do you believe that we do the things we do on, I guess, the most basic level? Like us as humans, why do we sometimes do things that are great for us? And why do we do even destructive things that we know aren't the best thing to do, but we do them and it causes us pain, yet we continue to do them anyway? Like, why do we do what we do?
Yeah. So I have some thoughts on that. And I'll start kind of at the beginning of, I think that everything we do, and this kind of gets to that mathematical logic we talked about with how I think, and it's more figurative than literal, but I think in our minds, every second of every day, we are constantly running kind of cost benefit analyses. So whether it's an action we're going to take, a behavior, a belief that we're forming, something we're going to say in a conversation, our mind is constantly running a cost benefit to say, what should I do? Should I do X or should I do Y? And it's running through the calculation to determine as much input as it can to figure out. And I believe the way it's running that calculation is, and I kind of use this metaphorically, that there's almost this meter that our mind is managing in us, kind of a pleasure versus discomfort meter. And it's running that calculation to say what's going to come out net positive on the pleasure side, right? I want pleasure. That's what we seek in life, I believe. So it runs that calculation and it spits out the thing that it thinks is net positive for pleasure. So ultimately, everything we do in life, all of human nature, the phrase I use is we do exactly what we want to do. In that moment, we run that calculation and we do the thing that makes sense to us. We never go against it, right? There's no such thing as like, oh, I don't know why I did that, right? We did it because we wanted to do it in that moment. If you ate the candy instead of the salad, it's because in that moment you ran that calculation and determined, I deserve that candy. I worked hard today, or I had a tough day, or whatever it is, right? Now, the key piece of that is, I think by default, our subconscious mind is in charge of managing that meter and that calculation, right? And it's in charge because one, it's super quick. So there's an efficiency to it, right? We can run that calculation very quickly. And for most things that aren't that important, that's cool. Like that's what we want. And also it does it because it's really, really good at it. Like it's really dedicated and committed. And I say this somewhat metaphorically, like our subconscious mind it has one job, keep us on the pleasure side of that meter. And that's what it does. And it's sole focus is that. It's a laser focus and it's really good at it. The problem is it's super short-sighted. It's managing that meter. It's managing that calculation second to second rather than day to day, week to week, year to year. So in those moments where we're doing what we want to do, we're doing the thing that brings us pleasure in that moment, right? The way I think about it, back to the math analogy, is our subconscious mind is running that math, but it's running it like a third grader would, right? Like basic algebra to run those calculations. What we want to do is become PhD level. When we run that calculation, we don't want just our subconscious to do it. We want our conscious mind to kick in. We want it to look from all sides and all angles and look at all the different perspectives. Make sure we have all the inputs right. Make sure that we're weighting them correctly. Maybe we did have a tough day at work and we feel like we deserve candy. But you know what? I know my personal value is that I want to be in shape and I want to be healthy. So make sure that gets factored into the equation and kind of run it that way. So that's kind of my overview of it. I think that's why we do what we do. I think when we break bad, it's because our subconscious is just running the show and we're not challenging it, and it's kind of basic level. And that's our job, is to figure out a way to step in and run that in a more sophisticated way.
Wow, that is super powerful. I absolutely love the idea of the meter and how we make decisions in the moment based on thinking in the long term, because we're using the third grade subconscious level versus PhD level.
Yeah.
So I know the question everyone's wondering is, okay, well, how can we take our subconscious, this realm of thinking that we don't have conscious access to, and how can we become PhD level with our subconscious? What would you recommend?
Yeah, so I'll caveat by saying a couple things. One, I think most of the ideas I have, and you'll hear this often, like, they're not new, right? People have been taught philosophy and different ways of doing this since Socrates and before. So I think it's just finding something that works for you, right? I think most of the ideas are out there. It's just kind of figuring out a way to piece them together. So that's point one. Point two, and this is the one I struggle with a lot. So I'll just say it kind of bluntly, but I'm curious how you respond to it. Whenever I try and answer that question, I always hesitate a little bit, because my first reaction is like, the simple answer is it's super hard. Like, there's not a simple path to it, almost to the extent that, like, when I talk to people, sometimes I'm like, this is probably not going to work for most people. And I can only base that off myself, because it took me so long to actually get it right. So I always want to be careful of, like, overselling it, that, like, all right, if you just do this, it's going to be set, right? Obviously, we have to give advice, we have to give tips, we have to help people along the way. But the real reality of it is, it's just as you've talked about before. It's repetition, it's building that muscle, and it's going through it. But to kind of answer your question more directly, for me, it starts with questioning. It starts with entertaining the idea that we shouldn't trust our own mind, right? And that sounds kind of wonky and like, hey, where are we going with this? Like, where is this? Now, it's not to say our mind is never right, right? I'm not saying you should never trust your mind. Anything your mind tells you, go against it. It's evil. It's out to hurt us. It's not that. It's that we shouldn't just inherently trust it. We should, the phrase I use is, be ferociously open-minded to what things might be. It might be different than you think, but also ferociously skeptical, meaning be analytical, be data-driven. So I think it's trying to follow kind of a mathematical, logical thread to say, okay, I think I may be sabotaging myself in some way, but I know we do what we want to do, right? We run a calculation. I picked to go out drinking last night rather than to work on my business or my startup. The easy thing would be to say, like, I'm just a screw up, or, I don't know, I'll get around to it one day, and not really get deep and get clarity. You have to ask those questions. You have to ask those hard questions of yourself and follow the logical thread, right? So you might ask the first why of, like, well, why did I go out last night? And you might say, well, I felt like I deserved it. I've been working really hard, and I thought there was something to it. So I went out. Okay, that's cool. So why am I upset about it this morning, though? If I made the right decision, then it shouldn't be a problem. I should feel good, but something's bothering me. Well, I wish I was making more progress in the startup I was doing. Like, okay, well, why aren't you making more progress? Like, what's really underneath that? And why do you think you should be making more progress? So it's a lot of, like, third grade level in some ways of those whys, of just keep asking the whys, but you can't let yourself off the hook. You can't give your mind the cognitive outs to say, like, no, it's all okay. You don't have to do anything hard. You don't have to change anything. That's the big piece. Your mind constantly wants to go there. It wants to believe, like, you're still a good person. You're doing the right thing. You just need to make some small tweaks. And sometimes that's not the answer. Sometimes we need to make big changes, and we have to kind of follow that logical thread to make sure we get to the truth of what those changes are and why we need to make them.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of what you just said is based around just awareness that you didn't make the decision that you wanted to make. You went out drinking versus staying home and maybe just spending time with your children, or spending time with your significant other, spending time doing something that's actually constructive. But if that next morning, like you said, we give ourselves the out of, it's fine because I'm not going to do that tonight. That's just a once a week thing. And then Pablo calls you and says, hey, let's go out tonight. And you're like, oh, it was a lot of fun going out with Carla last night. I'm going to go out tonight again. And then It's just an endless pattern over and over. And first, I do want to commend you, and I respect you for saying that this isn't something that's for everybody. Right. And I think this is something that's for 90% of people watching this show right now, because they're watching this because they want to get better. But most people don't have that awareness of, I made a bad decision, and they just leave it at that. And then, like you said, it's easier to give yourself the way out versus being introspective and being conscious and being aware and asking yourself, well, what is it that I really want?
Yeah.
Was what I did last night constructive to that end result? How can I get to this end result that I want? And what must I eliminate from my life in order to make that a reality? Like those questions and just bringing that awareness, that's huge, because eventually the pain is going to stack and stack to the point where you're like, I need to change.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's so true. And I think, probably the biggest challenge in that is this idea of like entertaining the possibility that things might not be the way you aspire them to be. So stick with that example, right? You could stay home and spend time with your kids or your significant other, but you go out with Carla, or you go out with Pablo the next time. The goal has to be the truth, right? The goal has to be the truth of like, what do I really value? What do I really want? And sometimes that's an inconvenient truth. And the realization might be like, oh man, I don't actually want to spend time with my kids. Like I did the deep reflection, I did the deep soul searching, and I just don't like this life. And that's terrifying, right? For me, for everybody, that's terrifying. And our subconscious mind will do amazing things to stop us from coming to that realization, because it hurts and it's painful and it's not what we think we want to believe. And it's that protection against that leads to so many of those outs and so many of the things we don't want to do. And I get it. Like, don't get me wrong. It's logical. It's logical that our mind wants to protect us from that, because go back to that meter, right? That's a lot of discomfort coming in the short term of making that realization that like, maybe I'm not fit to be a dad. So we want it. But exactly what you said, you have to play the long game, because in the long run, if you come to that realization and actually stay true to yourself and make adjustments based on that, whatever that is, now you start to shift that meter in the long run to the pleasure side. It's that short-sightedness of just avoiding that immediate discomfort that hurts us so much, I think.
So this is long-term self-work is what this really is. There aren't really too many. Do you think there can be immediate positive changes, or is this really all in the long term?
Yeah, I think there can be. I mean, it's all a question of how much awareness you gain, how much clarity you gain, and how much, this is where the mental toughness you mentioned in the beginning comes in. I think it's hard. It's really hard for people to gain clarity. It's really hard for people to figure out what they really want, what they care about. But it's only half the battle, right? There's people that'll get to that point, and then it becomes a question of, all right, now, because this is the way I say it, like, let's stick with maybe I'm not fit to be a dad. The first time you come to that realization could be catastrophic and could be horrifying and terrible and destructive, but you got there, right? But now you need to get there every single day going forward, because your mind's going to continuously be trying to revert and push back and be like, no, that's not true, and give you that comfort that you're seeking. So now you don't just have to face it that one time. You have to face it every day, because now when the decisions come up, do I work late today? Do I go out with my friends? You have to go back to that place and say, well, I remember I'm not a good dad right now, but I want to be a better one. So I need to have that realization and that motivation to actually get better. If you're not willing to face it every single day, my belief is you're just going to revert back, and your subconscious is going to step back in and bring you back to that comfort zone.
Absolutely incredible. So we have to confront these things that I love how you're coining it, the inconvenient truths, because I've never actually heard it said that way. And the more that you confront them, the more options you're given during decisions to choose the option that negates that inconvenient truth, in a sense, and in a way it creates a new truth, like a convenient truth. Like if I just think of it and how I can relate to that, because I'm not a father, but I was heavily overweight at one point, and I was, just to put it bluntly, I was a fat slob, dude. Like I was 60 pounds heavier. I was not happy with myself. I was balding at the same time. So I felt gross. I looked gross. And it would come to the point where I was about to order at a restaurant, man, and the pain kept stacking. And I just kept thinking to myself, I'm a fat slob. I'm a fat slob. And eventually it came to the point where it's like, well, I could order the burger, or I could order the grilled chicken. Right. And fat slob is associated with the burger. So I was like, I'm going to start making some different choices, so I'm not this fat slob. So kind of that and we talk a lot about self-love, but sometimes that self-hate can be a good thing, because that self-hate, that inconvenience, can get you to make the better decision for yourself.
Yeah, I think so. The way I think of it is, if you think of that calculation, that pleasure versus discomfort, self-love feels good. And sometimes we need that, right? We need to feel good. We need to be motivated. But sometimes we need that discomfort, right? We need self-hate, and maybe hate is strong of a word, right? People could debate that. But this idea of like criticizing ourselves, this idea of saying, hey, I'm not good enough right now, I'm not where I want to be. That's that functional discomfort, right? That we need to take on and embrace. But to stick with the framework, like my belief is our subconscious, who's constantly trying to protect us, it can't distinguish between functional and non-functional discomfort. So it sees discomfort. It sees you, Brandon, like, hey, man, like, don't call yourself a fat slob. Like, don't do that, man. You're all right. You're good enough as you are. And you might talk to some people and read some books and people tell you that. And your subconscious is like, jackpot. There's the cognitive out. People told me I'm okay. Like, it's okay that I'm this size. And maybe it is, right? It depends on what you value. If you think like, I am comfortable with this, but in your case, you weren't, right? Deep down, you knew, like, I don't feel good about myself. So I need to face that. I need to take on that discomfort. I need to tell myself I'm not good enough and I need to be better. And that's the only way that calculation is going to start to spin and say like, oh, okay, now get the chicken, because that's actually in line with what you want, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super curious what the catalyst was for you to even begin making these changes. You mentioned like when you're stuck, try something new. Obviously, you tried something new at that point. So it sounds to me like you might have been stuck in that point in time. So I guess my question to you is, what caused you to even go down this path in the first place?
Yeah, I think it's two main things, right? It's always a journey, so there's always a lot, but I think there's two main things. The one big one, which is a bit cliched, is when I had my son. So when I had my son, it wasn't the type of thing, I laugh about this with my brother all the time. We're both dads. Neither of us had that moment where like our child was born and it was like, oh my God, everything's different in life. Like that first day, it was like, this is pretty much like, he's great. I love him. Amazing. But I don't feel any different at all. It wasn't until he got a little bit older, like 2 years old, 3 years old, when I actually started teaching him lessons, that I started to realize like the things I'm teaching him, I don't actually do these things. Like I aspire to do these things. I believe they're the right things to teach somebody to be a good person. But it became so clear to me, like I couldn't hide from it, that I'm not actually living that. And it was a decision point. It was like, okay, I can either just continue down that path and just tell him to do stuff and be fake and a hypocrite, and that's comfortable and easy. Or I could be like, you know what? I should actually practice what I preach and try and do that. So that kind of started the journey of realizing that. And as I tried to teach him the right things to do, I was almost teaching myself at the same time of areas I needed to be better. So that kind of started it. The second big thing was a few years ago. So my wife is ill. She has multiple sclerosis. She's had it for a long time, but in the last few years, it's gotten worse, where it's like changed our life, and she's gotten kind of disabled with it in different ways. And to be totally blunt, like I just found myself angry all the time. Like I was just mad at the situation. I was mad what happened to our family life. I was frustrated. I didn't know how to deal with it. I felt somewhat helpless in it. And you hit that point, it was almost like a rock bottom to an extent of like, well, what am I going to do here? Am I just going to be angry all the time? Or am I going to figure out a way to try and make this a better situation? And that turned into kind of inward reflection to say like, well, I can only control myself. So let me see what I can do inside of me to try and fix that. And those are kind of the two big motivations for it.
And that's what really sparked you making a video each day and trying something new.
Yeah, I think so. You know, I had this mindset from when I was a kid. I think, you know, I had great parents. They were really great. I had a really great upbringing, you know, kind of traditional middle class, you know, everything was, there wasn't really a lot of bad stuff in my life when I was a kid, by and large. And my parents were somewhat overprotective, but I thought of that in a good way. But it started to build this mindset in me that like things work out, like things are okay. Right. So if you think back to this calculation we're talking about, I never worried too much about it. Like, why am I doing what I'm doing? It doesn't really matter. Everything kind of works out the way it's supposed to. But when my wife got sick and that all started to happen, again, that inconvenient truth of, oh, wait, things don't work out. Like this is real life, which I'm almost embarrassed to say it took me that long to come to that realization, like the privilege that comes with that. But once you realize that, you start to realize like, oh, I better take more control then. Like if I want to have a good life, I can't just assume it's going to happen. I need to take some more control in it.
Damn. And let me tell you, a lot of people want to go on that route. You know, it's a very difficult thing to go that route, because you can say, well, this happened to me, I just have to deal with it. Or like you just said, this has happened for us. This has happened for our family. And what is this teaching us? What is this pain helping us mold into? What can I use and take this and use it for? Like just your son is, I'm assuming your son's a little bit over a year old now.
Oh no, he's actually older now. So he's 7. So,
oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. So it started originally then, but yeah, been going for a while.
And the thing is, like, your son's going to be able to look back when he's 15, when he's 20, I said this to my wife the other day, when he's 25, he's going to be having a rough day, man, because life is life, like you just said. And he's going to be like, I wonder what dad would say about this. And he's going to friggin' pull up your YouTube channel, man. And he's going to watch a video that you made in 2020. And he's going to be like, wow, that's an awesome way to look at this. And let's say you aren't even in the picture at that point. I surely hope you are in 20 years, but let's say something happened and you weren't, because you never know. It's not guaranteed. He's going to be able to look at that. He now has this digital footprint of you. And he has you forever, because now you're immortal, because you put yourself out there to help people. But in a way, you're helping your son because now he has your videos, but also because you've changed yourself and you've modeled yourself in a way that you would want him to model you.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And I appreciate you saying that because I do think about that a lot. It is something of a motivation in that way. What I often say is sticking with the math analogy. For whatever reason, my mind works in math. I always think of it as like, you remember when you took like a math test in junior high or high school and you had to show your work, right? It wasn't, You couldn't just give the answer. Even if the answer was right, it didn't matter. You had to show your work.
So annoying.
I often think of it like that, right? Like with my son or whoever, I want to show my work, the good, the bad, the ugly. I want him to be able to see it because, to your point, if it was just the answer, if I just gave him the answer, when he has that tough day, when he's 25 or 30, he'll hear that advice, but he'll be like, but this is different, right? But this is hard. And this part and this part. And I want him to see the messiness. I want him to understand, like, you're going to mess it up. And here's how it's going to be tough. And here's what's going to be difficult. So it gives him the best. There's no guarantees, but I just want to give him the best chance to have the tools to figure out a way to have clarity and to just be thoughtful about the decisions he makes. Because that's really the best we can do, is just hope that they have that.
Absolutely. And so that's super powerful. Show your work. Yeah. We hear like document your journey and Gary Vee, like post everything you do, but showing your work and showing how you've gotten to where you are, super powerful, man. So I appreciate you saying that. Let's go back to belief, and let's go back to this thing that you mentioned about not trusting our mind, because I've read a lot of books, and I'm sure you have too, about how our mind isn't really us, right? Our mind is a tool that our energy, our awareness can use, but our mind isn't really looking out for the best of us, right? Our mind is looking for pleasure and it's looking to avoid pain. So because everything that we experience the world using our senses and our mindset and our belief, because we can't trust that, and we kind of have a filter on things, we see things differently than other people. I see things different than you and vice versa. Do you believe that there are societal beliefs that have been bestowed upon us or that we picked up through life that still limit us to this day and hold us back from becoming our greatest self? And if so, what do you believe those beliefs are?
Yeah, I definitely do think that's true for most people, that there are societal beliefs. It's probably somewhat different for each individual person, right? Depending on how they were brought up and what they were brought into. But I do think in general, there are kind of implicit blind spots or biases that we all have about what we do and how we do things, or how we're allowed to do things. That ultimately do limit us. Yeah. And the way I would say it is that our mind is constantly forming these rules and beliefs and views on what we can do in the world and what we can't, whether we're aware of it or not. So to your point, like, if we don't take control of that, if we're not active and aware and thoughtful about what we're forming, something's forming anyway, right? Our subconscious is pulling in something from our parents, from our friends, from school, from TV, from society. Things are being pulled in and we're forming some beliefs. And that's the most dangerous thing, right? When we don't even know that that's happening. It's happening one way or another. So I think in terms of like the big ones that are in our society, I think the most dangerous one that scares me, that I'm afraid of, is this kind of view that things are binary, that there's good and there's evil, that there's good and there's bad, whatever in the world. I think that framework perhaps is the one that is most dangerous to us as a people, because, think about the kids we watch, the shows we watch when we're kids. Typically there's a good guy and a bad guy, and the good guy's trying to beat the bad guy, and the bad guy's trying to hurt people just for the sake of hurting people. And you start to develop this blueprint in your mind of like, well, there is good and bad. And as long as I'm on the good side, I'm in pretty good shape. Like, I don't have to question too much. You start to develop a little bit of certainty. Like, if I have that right view, I'm pretty safe. Things are good. And I think that's a dangerous view. I think, as we know, right, the world is much more complex and nuanced than that. And even on TV shows, like, I try and do this with my son. Like, for example, he actually loves villains. So we'll watch Batman, and, Joker will be trying to do something to take over the city. And I'll often try and ask him, like, hey, why do you think Joker's doing that? Like, what do you think in his life caused him to want to rob the bank and make all this money and do this stuff? And try and entertain the idea of, like, what's the justification in his head? What's it look like? Because I just think when we see it in society a ton today, when people get that certainty and that moral high ground, and it's not that they're wrong, they might be right, but it's when you form that view of like good versus evil and good versus bad and just think things are that simplistic, things can go really bad and get really dangerous. And it could also be internal for ourselves, right? This thing about me is just bad. I hate that part about me and I just wish it didn't exist. It's probably more complex than that. So not being so simple, not being so certain, but being more open to things being much messier than they really are.
Okay, so this idea of good and bad, if there isn't a good and there isn't a bad, obviously, like you said, life is much more complex than that. How can we instead view things in a different way that will serve us? Like, what are the dangers of there just being good and just being bad? What's bad about that?
To me, the biggest danger, the thing I fear more than anything, is certainty. It's certainty in thought. Well, I shouldn't say that, right? I'm okay being certain on anything you can control. If I can control it, like I'm certain I'm going to make a video every day for a year because I know that's up to me and I'm going to do it, more or less, right? Or if there's something that's objectively measurable, sure, you can be certain about it for the most part. But when it comes to views and beliefs, I think when you start to form certainty on that, it's poison for our mind. Because once you've allowed certainty into your mindset around the topic, if you just think about logically what that means, it means I'm 100% certain. There's no doubt. There's no new information. There's nothing that's going to change my mind. This is right, and that's it. And it's very easy once you start to go down that path to start to believe other things and to start to let your mind take these views of like, well, I'm certain and I know what I'm doing is right. Therefore, that person is bad. And the things I'm willing to do to make sure that I tell that person they're bad or that I prove that I'm right, it doesn't always, right? Most people don't, but you look at the world today and you start to see it. You see the manifestation of that, of what people are willing to do when they allow certainty in. So that idea of good versus bad, good versus evil, to me, that's just a form of certainty. Like that person, that group, that belief, I am certain that is evil. And now you've allowed that in. And now, again, the things you're willing to do, I'm not willing to take that risk of allowing my mind to do those things. I just don't want to leave it unchecked in that way.
Well said. No, I appreciate you going deeper into that because that makes a lot of sense. And I've heard you talk about certainty in the past. I watched a few videos. You talked about certainty, how you explained what you just said in the video, and it was very different from anything I've ever heard. And I wanted to bring it up, but I also wanted to bring up clarity because you've talked about clarity. And I guess the question I'd have for you is, what should we be clear about when it comes to ourselves? Like, what are some things that we should know and be clear about with ourselves?
Yeah, I think it has to start with our values. And when I say values, I don't just mean, although it could encompass that, like be a good person, be an honest person, stick to your word, whatever it is. When I say values, I mean it much more back in terms of that calculation and that pleasure versus discomfort. And I think you agree with this from some of the things I've heard you said, like whether we like it or not, I think at a base level, we are seeking pleasure in life. Like we almost have to be, right? Unless we have a mental illness or something, we want to feel good. We want things that make us happy. So when you want clarity, I think the first thing you want clarity on is that. What do I actually value? What matters to me? What brings me pleasure in life? Now, I think where people often go wrong or where people don't like that is they think of it as like hedonistic. Like, okay, you just want to figure out the things that are base pleasures for you, and then you're just going to go with that. And no, you can't stop there. I think it has to be thoughtful about your values and which ones are you okay with. Like it might be that it feels amazing to shoot heroin every day. Like, I don't know, I've never done it, but it might be. So you could see how you go down that path and say, okay, I value heroin. I think that's where the thoughtfulness and the clarity comes in. Like, well, why do I value that? Is it aligned with the other things that actually matter to me in that more long-term view? So you have to really figure out like, what do you value in life? What matters to you? And then it's just a matter of having the mental toughness and the commitment to act that out and to live towards that. And just to add another little piece to it, just because I do think about this a lot in terms of the clarity, I think my hypothesis is that if you trace that back to the root, any value you have, anything that brings you pleasure in life, I think from like an evolutionary perspective, it all ties back to survival. Like at the end of the day, we are on this earth to survive and like spread as a race, right? That's what every animal I think is here to do. So it starts to get interesting because as you start to look at different things that play out, different fears you have, different things that bring you pleasure, what I find is an interesting task is to try and like trace that thread back and see like, how does that tie back to some base level value driver that's probably primitive in us that we just want to survive or we just want to procreate or whatever it is. And I always find myself surprised at how often I could trace back to that and be like, wow, I never would have thought that, I was mad at my brother about something he did the other day because I'm worried I'm going to die. But it's weird how often I find that connection comes back. It's convoluted. It's third grade level math, right? It's not good. But in my mind, that's where it's going in some weird way.
Wow. Okay. So let's take values because it sounds like that's like the first place we should visit, right? If we're talking about clarity. How can, and I guess how should somebody, because I know someone's listening and they're like, oh, I want to do that. I want to write down what my values are. Yeah. How should someone dive into their values and really, how give me an example. If you were instructing me on how I would do this, how would I write down my values and categorize what's most important to me?
Yeah. So I think the first step is where I always start, because I do think, again, pleasure is a big piece of it. What I start with is I make a list of everything that brings me pleasure. And I don't limit it, right? It could be simple, like I said, like if you shoot heroin and that brings you pleasure, put it on the list. Let's look at it. But if it's food, if it's spending time with my friends, if it's, creating a business, if it's help, whatever it is, make a full list of everything that brings you pleasure, right? So you have that starting point. And then I think you want to start to segment that list and say, okay, which one of these are more of that kind of subconscious, short-term, short-sighted, pleasure just in the moment. And which one of these are where if I turn on my conscious mind and really think about what I want for my life, they fit into that category. Now, what I think is the key, right? What I think you really should strive for are those values that cut across both of those. If there's something that scratches the itch of like your primal, more base level, this just brings me pleasure, but it also fits in line with something that you really want to achieve in life, to me, that's kind of the holy grail. And I'll give kind of a quick illustration of this, how I kind of start to think about this. If you remember, if you do, at least I do, when we were kids, you'd have to wake up in the morning for school, right? And you might wake up at whatever time, 6:45, and you'd get up and you're groggy. And you want nothing more than to just go back to sleep, right? You just want to put your head back on that pillow and go to sleep. Like your subconscious is screaming at you and you're trying to think of excuses of why you can and you can go to sleep. But then your conscious mind kicks in and it's like, well, you have a test today or your parents are going to be pissed and you're going to have trouble. Like you got to get up and you have that conflict. But every so often it would happen where you would do that. And then you'd realize like, oh shoot, it's Saturday morning. I don't have school today. Like I can actually go back to sleep and there's no issues. Like this doesn't hurt me in any way. I'm not missing anything. And I always found like that moment, like that Saturday morning moment, was the most amazing feeling in the world. Now it's a stupid little story, but I think it's illustrative because to me, that's when like your subconscious and your conscious align. They agree like, hey, you can get that base level pleasure you're looking for putting your head back down, but at the same time, it fits into your overall scheme. You're not screwing anything up. There's no guilt to be felt about it. So I think those are the things we want to try and find in life, are those values that kind of fit both of those. But the starting point, I think, has to be laying them all out there and then going down piece by piece. And I've heard you talk about this too, like, why is that a value? Why does that bring me pleasure? Get the clarity on those things and see the ones that are the most potent or give you the most bang for your buck, if you will.
Okay. So I heard you say, list everything that gives you pleasure and then segment those things into which of these is short-sighted, that's only helping me in that moment, but not helping me long-term. And then you said, find the ones that really are great long-term for what you want to accomplish and that also make you feel going to bring you pleasure. So that presupposes that somebody knows what they want long-term and knows the way they want their life to look. And from working with many salespeople, because it's all about income at that point, like how much do you want to make? But the question then becomes, well, what do you want to do with that? And then that's where their face just goes white. They completely space out. They blank out because they don't know what they want. So for somebody who doesn't have an idea of where they want to go because they think to themselves, well, anything could happen. I don't know where I want to go. What's the importance in knowing what you want for yourself long-term? And how can you put on paper exactly what that looks like?
Yeah, first of all, I love the question because it's getting exactly to the point that like this stuff is complex and nuanced and messy, and there's not a simple answer, which I think is so important in what you're doing is making people understand that. Because if they think it's easy and then they go to do it and they run into that first roadblock, they're like, screw this. This doesn't work. This is just nonsense. So I love the question right off the bat. And it's a hard question, right? Like, what do you do if you don't know what you really value? I mean, the simple answer on one hand is, be as reflective as you can. Practice mindfulness, try and get understanding of your thoughts and kind of figure out what you think about and what matters to you. Another thing I would add in there is like having an external instrument in some way, whether that be a person or a mentor or something where you can kind of check outward and look outwardly and see and get input. For me, that's my brother often. Like I'll have ideas of what I think I value and then I'll talk to him about it and he'll ask questions and through that I'll realize. So I think those are like good hygiene things to do that. But probably the thing, like the tip I would give and the most practical thing is back to that idea of starting the list. So let's say you go to make that list and you say like, okay, I can list out all the things that bring me short-term pleasure, but I have no idea what I want in the long term. What I would recommend is, okay, awesome. Start with that short-term list because ideally you want to find something that crosses over anyway. So likely there's something on that list, right, that fits for you. And you can think of it as like, I'll give you an example for me. Like I recently started doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and I love doing that, right? And there's a guy that I go to the gym with who's similar to that. And he started doing it just because he thought it was super fun and he loved it and he loved the UFC. and he did that. Now he made a career out of it because he loved it so much. He started teaching. He created like a side business. He runs competitions. And I'd use that as the example. When that guy first made his list, he might have said, I have no idea what I want to do. But one of the things on my list is jujitsu. Like, that's cool. That brings me fun. Let me explore that. Like, is there something I could do with that? Is there somewhere to go with that? And you'll probably hit a bunch of dead ends, right? Like, one of the things I'll often come up with is like, I love food. Food brings me a ton of pleasure. And then I'm like, well, what am I going to do with that? I could become a cook, but I'm not very good at it. I could just eat a lot, but that doesn't seem like it's going to help. All right, scratch that one. That one's gone. But inevitably, I think somewhere on that list of short-term pleasures might not be the exact thing, but it's a hint. It's an indication towards the thing that might be it.
You just dropped a knowledge bomb that took me many, many years to discover. And I absolutely appreciate you saying that. And it's so true, though, because I've always enjoyed talking to people. And I didn't know what I enjoyed doing until I did it and realized that I enjoyed doing it, which was speaking to a room of people. After I did that, it gave me a high that I never experienced. And I was like, dude, I've never felt that before. I want to do that more. So I said to my manager, hey, do you mind if I do all the team trainings? And he's like, yeah, I don't like doing that, dude. You can absolutely take that over. And I started to do that. And then it led to this, and it led to my YouTube channel. It led to all those things. But it all started with what gave me pleasure and how can I do more of that? Because it was constructive. It was good for me. It made me better. It helped other people too in learning what they needed to learn. So take what you have that's great, what gives you pleasure, and use it for other people. And that could be a big part in determining what your long-term vision can be.
Yeah. And I should say, right, in the spirit of the nuance and the complexity, there's a danger there, right? It's very easy if you're not thoughtful enough, if you're not aware enough, if you're not willing to face those inconvenient truths, to start going down that list and grab something that's not actually constructive for you. It's not actually long-term kind of net positive. But back to the subconscious and not trusting our own mind, you have to be aware of that your mind might look and be like, oh yeah, that's the thing. Like, go take that. That seems fun. That seems good. And listen, you got advice that you should just do the thing that brings you pleasure. So this gets back to the point of like, it's not easy. Like, as soon as you feel like I've got it and like, okay, autopilot, I can just go now, you're going to lose it. Like, it's got to be a constant effort of, I think this is the thing, but even to your example, like, I love this. There's a high to this, but you have to continue to question and be kind of exploratory in that, because it's so easy to break bad. It's so easy to fall off that groove that you want to be on for whatever reason. Our mind is kind of constantly looking to pull us there. So there's that kind of other side of it you have to be aware of too, I think.
So what question should we then be asking ourselves then?
Yeah, I think it's trying to get to ultimately if like there's those inconvenient truths. So like it's following that why pattern. Like, so let's take your example. So you gave that speech, you did the training, and you're like, I love that. That was awesome. Okay, what did I love about it exactly? Like, what was it that brought me so much pleasure? Was it that I just like being in control and I liked the idea that I was kind of owning the room? And maybe that's okay, right? But you could see where you start to go down that path and say, well, why did I like that control? Like, what felt good about that? Totally making it up now, right? But like, well, maybe when I was a kid, my parents didn't pay a lot of attention to me and I got bullied, and that didn't feel good. So now I want to be in control. I want to be the one that's telling people what to do. And you might go down that path and start to realize, like, maybe that's not the solution to that problem. Maybe I need to just come to peace with this issue that I have of not feeling like I have enough control. Maybe trying to do it in this convoluted way isn't going to actually benefit me. So that's not the answer. But you could go the other way. You could start going down that questioning and say, you know what? I just love helping people. Like, I think that's what it is. I saw people, I talked to them after I gave the training. They came up to me. They said they found it useful. That felt so good to me. Again, why did it feel good? Well, I think it's important to help people. I think it's important to serve, right? I feel like that's going to help me to grow in my career, whatever it is. And you follow that thread all the way through as far as you can, and past the point where your mind will tell you to stop, right? Past the point of comfort, you have to continue to look at it from different angles, right? What I always say is like, entertain the possibility that it's actually not that answer. What else could it be? And just keep doing it. And this is where it's tough, right? Because a lot of people hear this and they're like, that sounds exhausting. Like, that sounds painful. And it is. And that's why you shouldn't do it on everything, but you should do it on the stuff that matters. You should do it on the stuff that you value and figuring out what you want to do in life.
It sounds a lot like you're choosing the meaning that is most convenient at the same time, because I'll tell you, I absolutely love you diving in there, because it absolutely is a bit of the sense of control that it gave me. Like, I was never the most popular guy in high school, right? I kind of hung out with people from all different cliques and groups, and I didn't really always have the most attention on me. And I've always been someone who's liked attention, hence why we do live streams, why I interview people, but because I love helping people, but I also like that a bit myself, right? And I think it's okay for us to say that we have a bit more ego. I think a lot of people who do what we do have a higher ego, and that's great, because that gets you to go out there and do things that you might otherwise not have done. But you're right when you say that that could then lead you down a path of discovering that this isn't the thing that you want. It just filled one of those needs.
Right.
And really the meaning that I then chose was exactly what you said. Well, this is helping people at the same time. So I can meet my need here, but I can also attach this meaning of service and this meaning of I'm helping someone to make a difference.
That's the Saturday morning moment, right? You just got to put your head back on the pillow because you got what you wanted. You fit that short-term need of like, I just want to sleep. But at the same time, it aligned with your conscious mind of like, I'm still doing the thing that's okay in the overall grand scheme of things. To me, that's what that is. And that's the perfect thing, right? If it works in a healthy way to fit both of those, then that to me is like, yeah, that's the one. That's the one you want to go after.
What an awesome conversation, man. I have one friend in my life who reminds me of you, but they're the only friend who I have conversations like this with. And they just get me to sit back and be like, wow, I never thought about it that way. And he's like, I don't know, man, that's just how my brain works. But you remind me a lot of him. His name is, wow, I can't even think. Vince Nance is his name. And I'm going to have him on the show at one point, but definitely check that out because I think you two will have a lot in common. Yeah. But I just got to say to everyone listening, guys, before I ask you, Terry, what you're working on right now and what you've got coming up here, in the description, you're going to see a link to Terry's YouTube channel. Go to that channel right now and hit subscribe because you're going to see videos that he releases. Hit the bell too so you're notified of those new videos because he releases them pretty frequently. And I don't know if you're still doing it every day. I'll ask you in a second here, but these videos are short, right? Some of them are short. They're to the point. And the thing about the point is he explains the point in a way that you've never heard it, right? Or you might have heard it once, but this is something that you can listen to in the morning when you're getting ready. It's something you can listen to at night, or you can listen to it when you're having one of those days, right? Because Terry, you're just great at explaining things in different ways, man, and getting us to really think. And I think that thinking isn't really something that a lot of people do anymore, including myself. We're always stimulated with music or sounds or our smartphones, mainly our smartphones and all the things that are going wrong, but we never actually just turn everything off and just sit there and think. And it sounds to me like you've done a lot of that yourself. And I love the questions you ask because it gets me to do the same thing. So guys, go to his channel, check out his videos. And Terry, I want to know a couple last things here. The first thing I want to know is what are you working on right now? Because you're super sharp. You've got so much to give. And I'm curious, like what's going on for you? What's next?
Yeah, so I'm doing the videos. I'm doing them once a week now. Every day was tough. Every day was tough. So after the year hit, I gave myself a little break and said I'll do it. I actually still do them every day. I only publish one a week though, just because to try and make it a little bit more. So still doing that. I'm doing a lot more writing now. I'm trying to kind of exercise that part of it. I haven't historically been somebody that wrote a lot, so looking to do some articles, maybe a book. Kind of, we'll see where it goes, but definitely writing. Probably the biggest thing though is what I'm looking for, much in line with what we were just talking about, is having as many conversations like this as I can with interesting people who are willing to think differently. Like that's how I learn. That's how I think, is just hearing different things, having conversations. What I always say is like conversations where the walls come down, where we can just be honest and authentic and really talk to each other. There's so much meaningful that comes from that. My hope is it benefits people. So like through a podcast or whatever, but honestly, back to the Saturday morning moment, I just enjoy it. So I kind of want to go with that for as long as it goes. And hopefully it helps people at the same time. So yeah, just trying to have these conversations ultimately. That's my big goal.
Super powerful, man. I'm so excited to see where you go in the next year. I can't imagine where you'll be in 5-10 years and who you'll be reaching and talking to, and just incredible, man. So I guess the big question everyone's probably wondering is, other than your YouTube channel, is there anywhere else we can find you, or is your YouTube channel the main spot?
Yeah, YouTube's the main one. There's an Instagram, Adrogo, so ADROGO_philosophy. So I just kind of post kind of quicks and shorts on there too. And then just started similarly a podcast, trying to have conversations like this, called Adrogo Academy. Where we'll just talk to all different people, much in this vein. Like we talked to somebody recently who was a flat earther. And we did it though, not in the normal way of like, tell me why the earth's flat and let's try and prove you wrong. But like, hey, why do you believe, like, how'd you get to that? More in this line of thinking of like, how'd your mind get there? What's the benefits it's bringing you? So yeah, Adrogo Academy is the podcast. It's on Spotify, trying to have conversations like this.
That's amazing. Go check him out on there, guys. Check out the podcast, check out his Instagram, and click the link to go to his YouTube channel because you definitely want to keep up to date with this guy's doing. So many knowledge bombs were just dropped. I hope you took a ton away from this. Thank you for everyone who stuck around through the end. If you're watching the replay, so cool. What I would ask you to do is go in the comments, post what's your like number one takeaway from all the different things we talked about. We talked about beliefs. We talked about vision. We talked about inconvenient truths. We talked about rewiring your mind to make decisions that are better for you long term. Like so many awesome things. And Terry, again, thank you so much, brother. But for everyone else, if you're wondering, what's the number one way I can support this podcast or this live show? The number one way is to engage. Hit that like button. Let us know that you're enjoying what you're hearing, only if you took away value. And if you did take away value, if you heard something that's going to help you to make a better decision, even just one decision that can change the course of your life, then share this show, because that gets it in front of more people who also want to hear the things that we're talking about. So share it with even just one friend through word of mouth. Share it on social. Let's get this in front of as many people as possible so that we can help them to become better. And until you and I talk again, I hope that you have an incredible week ahead of you. And until we talk next time, continue to be better.